We are here with an incredible guest, the great John Spencer.
The internationally renowned chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute.
John Spencer served as an active duty soldier for over 25 years.
I suggest you listen to Colonel John Spencer. John Spencer is head of urban warfare studies at West Point. He studied every major urban conflict in history.
He says the Israeli army is going to lengths to prevent civilian casualties as no military has done.
I started using Twitter to say what I would do to defend my cities. That tweet became a little PDF that the Ukrainian government pushed out across the entire country for how civilians could help defend their cities.
Has Israel been guilty of war crimes?
I'm not Israeli, I'm not Jewish, but it became a clear understanding of all the things that are being said. Some of those things have been said about the US military. There were lies like that before, but they've never stuck so easily and then just fire poured on them globally because it's Israel.
They're willing to martyr all of their population to achieve their political goal.
Could you take me into your trips into Gaza? Specifically, what efforts you're seeing Israel take in trying to mitigate civilian harm?
The UN is failing. This has been the greatest test of the United Nations since the end of World War II. It's really problematic when this is the organization that's supposed to prevent war.
On behalf of the entire Jewish people, I want to say thank you for all you've done on our behalf, speaking the truth. We're honestly internally indebted, so thank you so much. All right, everybody, welcome to another podcast with Mislaibeled. We are here with an incredible guest this week, the great John Spencer. John, first of all, I just want to say hello, and I want to say thank you. We're very, very honored to have you here, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to give a little background on John, some of you may be familiar with him because, first of all, he often gets shout-outs from Bibi and Netanyahu. That happens frequently. It actually happened in front of Congress. But a little bit about John is he is a renowned leading expert on urban warfare. He's the chair, actually, of urban warfare studies at the Modern Institute at West Point Military Academy. Did I get that right?
Modern War Institute.
Modern War Institute, my apologies. He is a retired U.S. Army major of over 25 years and served 2 combat deployments in Iraq. Author of multiple books, including Connected Soldiers, Understanding of Urban Warfare, and the mini manual for the Urban Defender, which was translated into over 17 languages, right? Definitely curious to hear more about that. He's also the host of the Urban Warfare Project podcast. So quite a resume, no question about that. Just to jump right into it, I'm actually, could you share a little bit more about that story, about your book, specifically the mini manual for the Urban Defender? Because it was kind of like came about in its own way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got its own story of, I saw the Russians invading Ukraine in 2020. So I started actually using X, formerly known as Twitter, to say what I would do, John Spencer, somebody who studied urban warfare for a little bit, to defend my cities. That X thread or tweets became a little PDF that the Ukrainian government actually translated Ukrainian rapidly and pushed out across the entire country for how civilians could help defend their cities. And a great honor that it was used, because there's some things that people just don't know, like simple things about war. But I integrated like all the lessons that we've learned from urban warfare, especially people who defend urban areas for a certain amount of time. Because in war, it isn't necessarily always about defeating the other military. It can be just about biding time. That manual, it became a manual that, again, the Ukrainians kept translating. But then it started popping up in other places of the world, in Iran and Myanmar and all kinds of places, where this idea of civilians helping defend a nation, it's an ancient concept, but for the United States, it's Red Dawn. But the idea of a bunch of teenagers, running into the woods to defend America isn't real.
Yeah.
It took its own legs. It popped up all over the world, but everybody kept asking to translate it. And I just put it out as a PDF. And they started getting to things like, well, how do you purify water if you're cut off from water? How do you stop bleeding? And I eventually stopped updating it because it was starting to get into like, military stuff rather than really just what we call total defense. When civilians want to defend their nations, what should they be doing or not be doing? A lot of it's actually just what not to do in war.
Could you give an example of what not to do in war?
Stand in the middle of the street is one of the things. Basically shooting from an open area or on a rooftop. Some people think like, oh, I'll just get to the high ground.
Right.
In a modern war, if I can see you, I can kill you.
Right.
So the urban area gives people this unique ability, which I'm sure we'll talk about. It's ready-made, unfortunately, for war. All the windows, strong buildings, underground, all that for defenders. It would take you years to build that in other environments. So there's some things just don't stand in the open. Don't do things that are going to get you killed. Really.
Yeah. Do you think the idea of civilians being able to help defend the country from an enemy was something that was just largely forgotten because of the fact we're in the 21st century? So it's like, when was the last time you had civilians, like you were saying, outside of what looks like civilians, say with the Taliban, just rolling out in their PJs? Do you think that was very long forgotten, and you kind of brought that back to the light? Like, hey, everyone here can help against this Russian invasion.
Absolutely.
So I think it was overlooked.
Yeah, it was overlooked and forgotten. I mean, there's an element of what we call the peace dividend. Like after World War II, we didn't want another war, and a lot was done to prevent that. But there's also an evolution of militaries. Militaries got smaller. People started advanced technologies, and really peace. So in Europe, I mean, that ideal of total defense. I mean, there were books before mine, which because I'm an academic, used to highlight in my book. There was a Swedish book, there was a British book after World War II, like Home Defenders. It had all these different names, but it had been forgotten. And this is why I think it was translated so much. It was translated into Polish, into like all these different languages.
20 languages or something.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
And like, some of them I'm like, why do you... And they're like,
who are you planning to invade shortly?
That's right. There are a couple that asked, and I said no. Like, I didn't want it translated into Russian.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. So before you put out this tweet that eventually turned into this mini manual, was that your breakthrough as far as just like people realizing how much of an expert in this space you are?
I think it definitely was a catapult. As you know, there's some, whether it's click or tipping point and all these ideals of what tips you across the edge. I mean, I don't think I could have had that moment had I not had over a decade of academic research in it.
I'm talking about to the public. Like now you're well known. Like you are the expert. You've
the
taken
manual
this space.
and the X space, which I give full credit to, led to, then I became like a daily CNN, MSNBC, all of this stuff, because they're like, oh, wait a minute, there's a guy who is expert in urban warfare.
Yeah.
I view them as separate tracks, but absolutely that, I'm sure, catapulted me because I went from 10,000 followers to 100,000 in a short amount of time.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It must feel good.
It was, I mean...
I'm still working on that.
It's dangerous, though, as well, because then, with praise comes criticism. So, like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and, things like that. Like, if I had not had who dare would put out that kind of information, like, why should we listen to you? Like, well, I did these things in the military. I've done these things academically. Yeah. And not to say I didn't make mistakes in the things I was saying or whatever, but it catapulted me into the public eye. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you had the pedigree to back it up at the end of the day. So, it's always good to come with receipts, and that's not for you.
But sometimes, and then, which I don't know if we will, but I mean, I also taught military strategy at West Point. So beyond actual urban warfare, I taught strategy. So it was like somebody wants to pigeonhole me, like, well, he doesn't know anything about, meeting the war objectives or whatever, commenting on a war, like the fact that war is more about the pursuit of somebody's will than numbers. It's been interesting to see, like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, okay, and then who does? And we have this world of experts where we have bankers who overnight become international experts in war.
Kamala studied the maps.
That's right. Kamala studied the maps. But
she knows what's up.
There are other things, but other people, I mean, literally, they have risen, like, they're now the expert in whatever war it is because they started looking at it. They started Googling.
Yeah. Could you explain the difference between what you just mentioned, strategy and urban warfare, and like how that intersects?
Sure. I mean, at West Point, when we taught strategy to new cadets, I mean, you go back to all the military theories of like, what is war? War is the pursuit of political objectives. It isn't just about fighting.
Right.
So strategy is the pursuit of national political goals. Warfare is the actual fighting. Oh. In war, you could have economic wars. You can have these other types of wars to achieve your goal, whatever it is. But when war breaks out, like when the Ukraine-Russia war, you have to know. I have a really good in teaching strategy. Like, what do you need to know to understand strategy? Of course, you have to know political sciences because it's political. You have to know economics. You have to know military tactics and military organizations. You have to know all the stuff about the weapons. But you have to have a founding of theory as well. So that's, again, with the academics, is like all these great military theorists from Sun Tzu to some other guys that most people won't have heard of, get incorporated into when a nation is either pursuing a goal or even defending itself. There's a strategy to that, to achieve that political goal, which has been really hard for people to even understand in Israel. Like, well, it should be a black and white. We should do this. Like, if you understand strategy, which is, you know, everything from grand strategy to how do you even have the resources to achieve what you're talking about, it's actually pretty complex. So when somebody, you know, does some very cursory level of, well, they have more tanks, so of course they're going to win. They have better this. Like,
Yeah.
strategy is much more encompassing than just fighting.
So would that be your answer to say Piers Morgan when he keeps on asking, in my opinion, like a moron, of why didn't they just do the exact same thing to Hamas as they did with Hezbollah? That would probably be applicable.
100%. And I gave him that. So even in military history, there's theory to understanding military history. You have to understand it in the width of everything that's come before it, but the context. So Piers put that out. I actually responded on X, which I love that. I had that big ability. Like this, by asking that question, it shows you know nothing about strategy, military tactics, Hamas versus Hezbollah, Israel, intelligence capability. Like it demonstrates what you don't know.
Right.
That is a question.
But it's the question is said in a rhetorical way, like this should be done, when in fact, to anyone you're saying who's wise and understanding of these situations, it's like, hey, that's just, you're outing yourself as being...
That's right. That's like the Tucker Carlson. I'm just asking questions.
Yeah. The famous Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, I'm just asking questions. Like, no, you're asking you have a reason you're asking that question. You're making an inference.
Yeah, of course. Well, we could get into that soon.
Yeah.
But Candace started there, and now we see where she is. I'm not here to coin Tucker or anything just yet, but he's a year behind, I would say. All right, everybody, want to take a quick second to give a big shout out to our sponsor for this episode, CubX. CubX is, as far as I'm concerned, the #1 IT provider for businesses, whether that be big or small, real estate, healthcare, finance, e-commerce, apparel. It does not matter. These guys have it on lock. I know this because I personally use them, and I've referred these guys to probably 10 different friends of mine who are all running both small or large businesses, and they've all come back to me and have given me rave reviews about these guys and thanked me profusely for sending them their way. So if you want to get ahead and focus on the things that make you money and not be busy for hours when a tech issue comes up, give these guys a call. They have changed the game and, most importantly, have changed the IT experience for those who use them. Their customer support is off the charts. I can personally attest to this. One ring, they pick up, and you're dealing with an experienced tech who knows what's up. Feel free to test it. If you're starting a new company or are unhappy with your current IT provider and are looking for the best product out there, take it from me. This is a no-brainer choice. Give these guys a call. You can reach them at 732-444-8771 and choose sales when following the prompts. Or you can reach out via email at hello@cubx.com. That's HELLO@CUBX.com. You can also check them out at cubx.com. That's CUBX.com. Now back to our episode. I wanted to go back a little bit to the beginning.
Yep.
Right. Could you just give me a little background of where you grew up, what type of household, and like how that influenced you going to the Army at 17?
Sure. So I grew up in a suburbia of Indiana, a pretty small town, but a mom who worked 3 jobs to raise 3 kids on welfare, at one point homeless. I still went to school and did the school things, but I knew that after high school, in my world, there was nothing after that. There was no college. There was nothing. I bought what the Army was selling, which was adventure, college, all of that. So I joined, actually, before I graduated high school, I was able to join the military.
Wow.
They have a program in the United States called the Delayed Entry Program. And I went in, and as a young kid, I actually say I was re-raised in the military, because with my mom working 3 jobs, like, we kind of raised ourselves. We went to school, we came home. That was it. So I was re-raised on everything from how to eat to how to earn respect, to give respect, how to. Of course, I learned all the military stuff, but
Discipline behind it, you're saying?
Discipline. I think I'm actually writing a book right now with trying to reflect back on what did I bring into the military, like this ability, because of what my mom was doing. Like, there was no choice of quitting.
There were no options.
No options, right?
No fallback.
You showed up and you keep taking another step, which becomes actually really big in the military if you haven't gone through that, if you haven't gone through a place where there's no option other than to go, like if quitting is an option for people,
they do it.
They do it.
Or they at least could.
And the military gives you thousands of opportunities throughout the military career. Like, you can do this or you can just choose not to.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. When it comes to, you went through Ranger School, right?
Yeah.
Could you take me, this has always fascinated me. Could you take me through what a day in Ranger School is like?
So Ranger School is a unique school within the U.S. Army. Not only did I go through it when I was young, like 20 years old, but I also taught there as a Ranger instructor, which was another unique opportunity. It's a course that's meant to, it's called a leadership course, but it was actually a course developed after the Korean War to take the lessons from the Korean War and give it to the rest of the Army to make them better. But it's a course where they bring you to your lowest possible state so that you understand, one, what your body can go through, but also because they're testing your character. It's a character school. A typical day would be walking for 20 hours a day with a rucksack on your back.
20 hours.
20 hours. We say in the school you get, so it's a sleep deprivation is one of the things that you go through in Ranger School, because you're doing continuous operations. So it's practicing much like in Vietnam, Korean Wars, like continuous operations where you're walking and carrying heavy stuff on your back. So a typical day, like in the actual field training, you're walking for 20 days. You're doing, a mission like an ambush or a raid. You might eat once in a day because it's a sleep deprivation, food deprivation, leadership stress school to test whether you can lead under stress.
Wow.
And there's no rank, so we take all your rank away, and you form these little teams. You understand that you're never going to accomplish your mission if you don't work as a team. It's probably one of the most impressive human experiences that a military has designed. But when you graduate, if you graduate, so only about 50%, which is still pretty high for special training. If you go through like SEAL Buds training, it's way lower.
So I was going to ask, what's the difference between this and SEAL Bud training?
Yeah, they're not comparable. I mean, the goals of what they're trying to produce. So SEAL is trying to produce, an operator. Ranger School is trying to create a leader.
Uh-huh.
And it's actually for the entire Army. So, Buds or SEAL training, you go into it to see if you're capable of going through the training. Ranger School is anywhere from a 3 to 6 month course, where it's at the end of it you'll know a lot about small unit infantry stuff, but you'll be validated as this person was put to the test and led under stress.
Fascinating. So, and what were the skills that this actually interests me a lot, because I've always been very curious about leadership and just resilience in general. I'd say that at this point, this is probably the focal point of the podcast that really drives me. Just operating on 3 hours over here, so I'm doing some heavy Ranger School activity, working with only one eye over here because I don't know what happened yesterday morning. I meant to say that yesterday morning I woke up. I don't know, maybe it's a sty, who knows? But it seems like I have all that leadership and endurance. But what are some of the skills that you would say you need to go through ultimately Ranger School?
I mean, it's different. I mean, it is the way the school's designed. Of course, they'll tell you the things that I would say after having taught there and actually survived the school, because that's what you do. You survive the school. Is that you know how to make decisions under stress with a little bit of time, because it's all about every day is basically a mission, and you get a short amount of time to plan the mission, execute the mission, and hit restart. You know how to form teams rapidly, because they actually change. Every day you don't know who's going to be the leader. They pick a new guy, like today you're leading, and then you have to rapidly go through this leadership process. You understand how to execute some of the missions that the Ranger School teaches.
Could you give some quick examples? Sorry for cutting you off. This is just fascinating to me. Could you give some quick examples of how you would do those things? So what have you learned that under pressure, you're in a stressful under pressure situation with not a lot of time, that your mind will go to in order to now make the next decision?
Yeah, first thing is to understand the mission you've been given. So this is about repetition too, right? Because you get so many of these during a Ranger course. You know that you get a mission, somebody tells you what to do, but you have to understand it clearly, so that way you know, like, move to this point, conduct an ambush. So you have to know how to do an ambush, how to move stealthily as in like quietly get to the location and execute it. But if you keep doing that, you understand quickly, which is what the military is. The military is about doing things quickly as well, like how to understand something really fast, put it out so that everybody else understands it. There's of course, the military planning, which has actually led to the book, right?
Yeah.
I understood in writing the mini manual for the Urban Defender after somebody who helped write the Ranger Handbook, which is what the Ranger student carries, is that they need simple instructions, lots of pictures, to be able to communicate and understand quickly. Because in the military, that's what leadership is also about. It's like you need to give people instructions, have them understand it, and then be able to do what you've asked them to do with their own initiative.
Yeah.
Which is all about that. So after doing that every day for 3 months, you have, of course, what we call the tactical skills of what you're trying to do. You have to demonstrate that you know how to do these things. But it's more about, okay, you're the leader. You got to give instructions so that everybody else follows, and you have to get them to follow you. So that's a part of the leadership process.
Being able to improvise effectively and quickly. Would you say that that's correct?
Improvise, it's just lead. Yeah.
So is there anything for like just a random person that's listening that's not in the military, like anything that you could have that's applicable to the lessons that are applicable, or that's really what I'm just harping in on, just because I'm curious actually for myself of specifics. Obviously, the things you learned were specific to the military, but I'm sure there are plenty of overarching lessons there that apply to the regular person that's a CEO or anything for that matter. Anything that you could share on that about how that would be applicable to?
Yeah, I mean, there's some other people who have podcasts about this, right? Like Jocko.
Jocko, yes, you're on Jocko.
Jocko takes and I was on Jocko, and he's great, but he takes those lessons from within the military and takes out all the military stuff and say, like, in Ranger School, all the things that he talks about are there as well, but there's, because of the speed of it, one is to know yourself, right? And the school lets you know who you are, because we're going to take everything away from you, to include your food. And actually, me and Jocko talked about that. That doesn't happen to Buds. Buds, you get all the food you can eat. But they physically are going to put you to a test. So here we're going to take your food, we're going to take your sleep. So you have to have a conversation with yourself.
Wow.
Which is, in leadership, you can't fake it. So there's no faking in leadership, right? So you also learn, like, you have to know who you are. But you have to know when you're leading, a leader doesn't have to know everything, which is, again, with you rotate people through, like, who's your best navigator, who you can put, who the best person on the radio is. And then you quickly can put a team together, identifying their strengths to help you achieve your goal. How to communicate, this is about us, not me. There's so many lessons in there.
Yeah.
I can't find just one for you because we could.
Yeah, it'll be days. I got it.
But you have to, everything from the physical strength, because the military is about physical strength too. It's not just about, you have to be able to carry things, and you have to be able to move things for long periods of time.
Sounds like a lot. Sounds like something that I'm not so sure I can handle. That's for sure. All right, everybody, want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor for this episode, ISAK Clothing, quick wardrobe change, and I could never be happier. I started wearing their stuff recently. They are a business casual line offering style, comfort, and luxury. They have a fantastic selection of suits, blazers, and polos. Some of their signature products are Supima cotton shirts, which are super comfortable and offer a soft four-way stretch, breathable material, and offer amazing comfort. Pricing is affordable, ensuring you're not getting garbage, but also that you're not breaking the bank and you're getting great bang for your buck. Customer service, fantastic. That's the biggest thing for me. I use them. They're great. If you want to upgrade your clothing game, make sure to check these guys out. You can find them at isaknewyork.com. That's ISAKNY.com. I got you guys a great discount as well. Spend $100, get 20% off. You can enter a promo code upon checkout, Mislaibeled. That's Mislaibeled with an I, and you will be able to get that discount. So again, to check these guys out, go to isakny.com. That's ISAKNY.com. These guys are the new up-and-comers. Their stuff is fantastic. I've been wearing it lately. Super comfortable, affordable. You will not be disappointed. Now, back to our episode. Can we talk a little bit about what exactly made you decide you want to specialize in urban warfare?
Sure.
What was that was like, this is the thing I'm going to become the expert at?
Yeah, some of it's, I do believe things happen for a reason. I'm a God-fearing man. I look back, I can tell you about when the moments where I was starting to be shifted that way. So one of them was, I went through a program where I went to Georgetown for a master's, and then I spent 2 years in the Pentagon. And at the end of my 2 years in the Pentagon, I competed to be in like a think tank for a 4-star general, where he recognized that the military is a culture, is a bureaucracy, can't think for itself sometimes. So he created this team of 20 senior ranking officers, from generals to colonels, junior officers, and civilians, to think about things he wasn't thinking about. In that year, which was around 2014, we looked at mega cities. So cities over 10 million that are rapidly, basically popping up around the world. Cities, we only have 2 in the United States, but there's actually almost 40 now. We studied mega cities, but we really were studying large urban areas and the challenges that they, for political reasons, like England, the ability to feed, provide services for rapidly growing populations in urban areas. But could you do a military mission? Not just attacking in high intensity, but even humanitarian disaster relief, things like that. And for a year, we looked at cities, and that was the beginning of my kind of academic look at, like, wait a minute, there's a big gap here that we're not, even militaries aren't prepared for that environment. We actually we reject it. Like, we don't want it. Nobody wants to fight in an urban area. So I did that year study, which gave me immense amounts of understanding of what we don't know. Moved to West Point, where I was teaching strategy. And one of the things we were doing at West Point was like, are we the best? Because militaries also are always trying to make sure that they're doing what they need to prepare for the war, to compete against an adversary. West Point decided that we weren't understanding the modern wars, and I helped create the Modern War Institute, a research center that I work with, or I still work for. I helped create it. And part of creating meant writing and researching and all that. So I published an article in 2015 about concrete walls. And if you've ever been to Israel, it's no new news to anybody who lives in Israel. But for some reason, people didn't understand for the nine-ish years we were in Iraq that concrete walls in urban areas was how we achieved many of our goals. And that article, basically about concrete in war, went viral. And then all of a sudden, I started studying urban and writing about urban more, and just kept doing it. Started doing conferences, all of this on just urban warfare. So I kind of got directed. You follow the market,
Yeah.
but I got directed that way. Of course, I had my own urban warfare experiences, and I invaded in 2003 in Iraq, had some urban experiences. I went back and I was in a part of a big battle called the Battle of Sadr City, very urban in Baghdad. And I understood that we were unprepared even in the fights that I was in for. But this is where I say, I spent 25 years active duty infantryman. That's great. And I do have a lot of lessons from that, like the Ranger School. But it was the academic study of everything that's come before our current wars. So I do case studies where I go back and look at like Stalingrad, Aachen, Ortona, all these old wars, even going back to like siege warfare. And what did we learn or not learn? And is there kind of things that we should be understanding? That's why I'm the urban warfare guy, because I've now taken the time to understand it, the theory of it, the actual tactics of it, and then really just the scholarship, what we call.
Yeah, that's a lot of research to go through, and I'm not surprised that it made you into the person that has the best knowledge of the situation. With regards, obviously, to the war that's still going on in Israel, I mean, obviously the question is how long this will go on for. How do you feel that this war compares, let's say, as far as the urban environment to, the invasion you did in 2003, where you fought right in Iraq, the urban warfare there?
It's a great question because, in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, there was the Battle of Baghdad. So Baghdad's a city of 6 million. The Iraqi military was huge, but why wasn't there a big fight? The Battle of Baghdad wasn't really a battle. It was a battle. There was some major fighting, but it ended within days, where a single brigade drove into the middle of the city, drove a tank around, and the Iraqi military recognized they were defeated.
Yeah,
which really lets somebody understand that even in urban warfare, war is also a contest of wills. If you can defeat somebody cognitively through who is it? Oh, it's the American military here. Through immense amount of speed. Like, how did you get to Baghdad in a couple days? And then what did you bring to you had the air power, the tanks, everything. that in war, and this is really hard for, again, the newly appointed war experts, that it isn't just about the fighting. If I can defeat somebody's will to resist, which is what happened in those 2003 battles. There was, of course, fighting, but once the city of Baghdad fell, the capital city, the military literally, and I found these because I jumped into the northern part of Iraq. It's actually much like Colorado, just cold, mountainous terrain. And then we drove south towards the major city of Kirkuk. The Iraqi military took off their uniforms and walked away.
Wow.
Because they had been cognitively defeated when their capitals fell.
But can we say the difference between, the war in Iraq and this war, obviously, with Hamas is one is you're fighting an army, and the other is you're fighting an ideology. At least that's what it seems like from this conversation, because the ideology is we're better off, in this case, if we die, and it's more of a, it's not a military objective almost. I mean, obviously they want to, keep the land, but it doesn't feel like there's a, they'll just blow themselves up. So when you're dealing with that, how do you defeat someone's will in a scenario like what Israel's dealing with right now?
Yeah, that's been hard for people to understand, because this is where, again, all the experts say, well, you can't defeat an idea.
Right.
Well, of course I can. And there's lots of history. Again, I don't talk from like John Spencer's opinion, although I had analysis. Like historically, I mean, that's like, and I try to give people comparisons, and this is actually where we've gotten wrong. Like, just like, how does Gaza compare to the invasion of Iraq? Night and day, right? Everything, the geography, the enemy, the goals, everything is night and day. Even which I'm sure we'll talk about, why Gaza is so different, is that there hasn't been, that I can find in the history of war, a place where the enemy has prepared the urban areas for 20 years to fight for them.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah. I mean, most cities don't, like, this isn't a war city. In Gaza, the Gaza city was a war city. It was designed, built, investments in the underground was for war. That doesn't happen in other cities.
So effectively you're saying even the wars that, let's say, you've fought in, even the urban wars you've fought in, the defender didn't have nearly as much time.
Almost all the wars that I've studied. And this is where, so in the total time of the Iraq war, the city of Baghdad was 6 million. It wasn't a big fight. There's a small city of only 300,000, the city of Fallujah, that becomes the biggest battle of the entire Iraq war for the U.S. military. And we have vastly more capabilities than the IDF does, just resources.
Yeah.
It's the biggest battle of the entire Iraq war. Why? Because we gave the enemy just 6 months and said, we're coming. And then there's another battle later in Mosul against ISIS. ISIS was given 2 years to prepare the city for war. Stalingrad, no preparation. The two militaries met in the city. Almost all Aachen, Ortona, all the ones I can rattle off to you, Mawari, these are where something triggers the fighting, and then there's a battle.
Yeah.
Gaza was prepared for 20 years. There's no other example. Again, Mosul, 2 years, but we can talk about the differences even in Mosul. But that city, like, the enemy took it and then started preparing and did a really good job in building the defenses just in 2 years. And it took a massive army to take it away from ISIS. But for the Americans, again, Baghdad, they didn't even defend it. There was some fighting, but it wasn't prepared for defense. Most people of the world who want their people to be prosperous and all that don't invest all their money into building their cities to be fought for.
Yeah, no, because they want to live in peace.
Yeah.
So why would they spend all their money, time, and resources to build underground worlds to fight? So just on a fundamental level, why do you think the world is obsessed with not giving Israel the same comparisons that it would give to anywhere else? Right? Why the double standard and the bias, in your opinion?
It's a long list, to be honest. Of course, I've come to understand, as somebody who's, look, I'm not Israeli, I'm not Jewish. I have friends, of course, because I've been studying the IDF for years. I started initially going, look, what you're saying is not true on the history of urban warfare, like even about protecting civilians, bombs, how many bombs were used, density. But it became a clear understanding, like all the things that are being said, like some of those things have been said about the U.S. military. Like there's been groups who say the U.S. military creates war crimes, it's carpet bombing places. Like there were lies like that before, but they've never stuck so easily and then just fire poured on them globally.
Yeah.
Because it's Israel, which has really been really challenging for me. Like, even some people who before this war seemed reasonable, like, what you're saying is that you believe the Israel and the IDF are this evil faction that is purposely trying to eradicate a population, despite what I'm telling you, which is on the ground with them, that it's the opposite. But there are other reasons, right? Of course, so that's what I call the Israeli standard. Like, this is, some of these things were said about Israel. There is a part of the global kind of perception of something, and we could go to like the history of the Palestinian cause. But this is also the first war, and it's unfortunate for Israel, that is then fought within this world of social media. We started seeing it in the early 2000s. We called it the TikTok wars. We had like wars like Nagorno-Karabakh. You had the wars against ISIS, where social media was becoming a really big factor. Then you had the Ukraine-Russia war, where Ukraine utilized the ability to communicate to the outside world for their benefit. This is the first time where, an algorithm-based social media campaign like TikTok, X, and things like that will feed global populations only the negatives out of war. So, like the picture of a child. And one example I give is in the Battle of Fallujah in 2004 for the U.S. military. The first Battle of Fallujah, there were 4 American civilians that get killed in the city. They're contractors, former military contractors. They get their bodies burned, dismembered, and hung from the city bridge. It becomes, in newspapers, a national news. And the American population wanted something done about it, so the president orders the U.S. military in. Al Jazeera, though, is sitting in the hospital. It starts to sound really familiar, right? Al Jazeera is sitting in the city hospital of Fallujah, airing photos of children that have been harmed in the fighting. And within 6 days, it becomes a global condemnation of the U.S. military, who are trying to pursue their goals, and they're defeated because of this negative image of civilians being harmed in the war, in an inference that you can stop it. So they did stop it because they could. They lost the battle, stopped, pulled out of the city, encircled the city, and 6 months later had to go back in and clear it. It was the example of what was to come in Gaza, where the algorithm actually feeds anybody a negative picture of a civilian harmed, destruction, all these things. And this is where, because some people, to include, I think, legitimate, like good intentioned people, have no clue on what came before. Right. So they see the destruction, like these aerial photos of
what came first, what came
that's right.
second, yeah.
Or when if
you ever sorry to interrupt, if you take the second part of an equation and put it first, the first part always looks terrible.
Right.
That's effectively this entire argument. It's just one big gaslighting thing of like who started. Because if you just say you started October 7th, the automatic response is, well, you killed a Palestinian civilian on October 6th, so we're doing it because of that. It's just round and round we go. Right. So,
and I focus on war. So this again goes back to what are the goals of war? War is the pursuit of political goals. So then you take the two sides, but there's an old dead Prussian actually named Clausewitz who did something. He called the holy, not the Holy Trinity, but he called it the paradoxical trinity of war, meaning that war is a contest, of course, between two governments, political, and then sometimes it becomes a contest between two militaries. But actually, and we have lost. The U.S. military has lost wars when they've lost the support of their own population. Mm-hmm. So we call this will. So the war is a contest of wills between the governments engaging in the war, their militaries, because even if your military doesn't have the will to fight anymore, you can lose.
Yeah.
And their populations. So the social media has driven populations around the world, and this is where we have the useful idiots of like kids on college campuses freaking protesting for an evil terrorist organization. But it's not new, but the newness is the fact that Israel has had to defend itself in a war. And I can tell you about all the things that they faced that nobody else has faced.
Yeah, I want to hear about that, actually.
But in a global fishbowl where the whole world is watching, they don't care what you say. They only care about, like, John Spencer, look at these images of children that have been harmed. I'm like, yes, and those are horrible. And actually, they're moral injuries to soldiers who see that. But the ideal that it's unique to Israel's campaign, the destruction of urban areas, the civilian casualties, the use of bombs. Like, no, I can show you pictures of every city, even of the modern times, Mosul, Raqqa, Aleppo, Mawari, where the pictures look very similar.
Yeah.
And because and this goes back to my manual, I can teach you to turn every building in every street of every city into a battle to where you're not going to take it from me unless you destroy it.
Yeah. You got to work hard for that.
Yeah. I can teach. I taught Ukrainians how
So
to.
it's almost like automatic destruction. It's
right.
If you want to get this tunnel, you're going to have to blow this building to smithereens effectively.
But there have been wars where you can convince the enemy that, okay, either for the protection of your population or for the protection of you, it makes no sense for you to do. So there's been urban battles that have been won without fighting, which is the ultimate.
Right. Let me ask you one other thing before we get into what you experienced. I know you went to Israel 3 different trips, so you have four now. So you really have an inside scoop. You mentioned when I asked you why the double standard, you brought in social media effectively and the algorithm and how that's playing out. Not to be someone who just yells anti-Semitism. Yep. It's not about that. Is there a component to this that it's, that it is like there's just a large, like people, there were a majority of people that were always here, and this just gave them the right to start speaking because they'll get a following. And really, there's just an anti-Semitic aspect to this because they don't complain about any other war that's ever existed in this, till now. And there could be an actual real genocide happening, in Africa, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. They don't seem to care. So outside of just the algorithm component, do you think that that's a factor in this?
100%. Yeah. There's no other, I'm an Occam's razor, like, okay, the simplest answer. There's no other explanation for it than, and there's I'm also a data-driven person, right? So there are 3 types of lies in my work: lies, damn lies, and statistics. But there's actually, like, take the United Nations votes of condemnations to nations. No other nation other than Israel exponentially the number of UN General Assembly condemnation votes of Israel's actions to defend itself. But yes, every aspect from the voices, the inference of what you think they're doing, there is an anti-Israel, anti-Semitism. There's no other explanation to it, like, because it goes beyond reason.
Yeah.
That is absolutely why did it fuel so much? Then you can go into, but there was a lot of work done for this moment, right? The investments in BDS or Palestinian causes that get invested into universities. I also work in the world of, like, the United Nations. Like, who are these credible institutions that we look to for information about war, but who also have a very long track record of being anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. But we look to them, okay, but what does the UN Office of the High Council of Human Rights say?
Yeah.
Of course, Israel is doing this on purpose. Israel is trying to erase the Palestinians. But I've been fighting all these organizations. So again, this goes beyond reason, absolutely. But there are many other reasons here. There's also an anti-war crowd here. There's massive organizations who believe there should be no wars ever.
Just in their own little pipe dream worlds.
But they're very heavily financed and powerful, even within the United Nations. These are, some of them call themselves human rights advocates, human rights lawyers who say, look, I know you were attacked. I know they took your hostages. I know they committed horrible actual war crimes, but you just should not do anything about it.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like, so there's never a time for war. I mean, to me, the creation of the world, the way it was created, and human beings, unfortunately, there's a built-in factor where war is necessary sometimes.
Absolutely.
The idea to believe not is just to allow yourself to get killed. It's called suicidal empathy, like Dr. Godsad. I don't know if you're familiar. Do you follow him? Yeah. He's awesome. I just had him on. He's fantastic. But that's really what it is. It's like, we're going to be so nice, we're never going to fight, and you're just going to get killed. That's really effectively what's going to happen. All right, everybody, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Sunset Window Fashions, more commonly known as Daniel Dex, the owner of the company, who is fantastic. He does all kinds of window shades, whether that be drapes, zebra shades, Roman shades, silhouette, pirouette, you name it, any type of window shades. These are the guys to go to. As I always say, and it's the truth, I know this because I use them. Super, super nice guy. Amazing prices. I even priced it out with someone else. He came in far, far cheaper. Customer service, awesome. Just an awesome guy. I highly, highly recommend people reaching out to him. He's got the patience, picks up the phone. Just a nice guy with fantastic prices. You can't go wrong. And all the wealthy people are using him. He services mainly the New York area. across the board. He will get back to you ASAP. The best number to reach him on is 917-440-0590. Again, that's 917-440-0590. Just ask for Daniel. You can let him know that you heard about him from the Mislaibeled podcast. Now back to our episode. So could you take me into your trips into Gaza?
Sure.
I'm very, very curious about that and how that compares, what efforts you're seeing Israel take, firstly, in trying to mitigate civilian harm.
Sure. So I'm an urban researcher. That's what I am by definition. And what my job is at West Point is to create content, podcasts, articles, case studies, research reports on modern wars. So I'd already studied the IDF's previous wars. I'd written case studies on the Battle of Suez City, Jenin, Nablus, like all these other urban fights. I had been to all the urban warfare training sites in Israel, underground warfare, which is I had already been there. So when this war kicked off, I immediately wanted to understand the challenges the IDF were facing in Gaza, because it became, I don't know if I recognized it at first, the biggest, the war in Gaza is the biggest urban-centric war in modern history, if not history. There's been lots of fighting for cities, but this level of fighting in the cities, the level of preparedness, the defender, the level of use of human shields, human sacrifice, the tunnels. So by December of 2023, I was on the ground in Israel with previous connections that I had with the IDF, trying to understand, okay, what are the challenges that you faced? And I went into Gaza with the IDF. I was in a Hamas tunnel in December where I met a couple other individuals I hadn't known before in the tunnel, which is its own story. Understanding even the complexity of the tunnel fight, which I had been studying before either. I was on the ground in 2021 after Operation Guardian of the Walls, which was the last time Hamas had broken the ceasefire and attacked Israel with rockets. So I would go in, I'd have meetings with the IDF division commanders on what were their challenges. I traveled with the IDF into Gaza to visit the units, to observe what they were doing. And I have research goals each time I go as well. Like, okay, what have been the challenge? How are you dealing with the tunnels? What are you doing to protect civilians? And that became more and more research. But I was there in December of 2023, February of 24, July of 24, and December of 24.
They're roughly, on average, every 3 to 4 months.
Right, because and the war has changed every time. Even I'm studying it even from within the political context. Again, war is the pursuit of political goals. So what the IDF was doing in Gaza was also what the political context was driving the IDF could or couldn't do.
Yeah. I feel like the U.S. really did not help in this effort because, this is what I said. I'm curious to know what your opinion is. Somehow or another, we gave Hamas a seat at the table. I don't know when that happened, but we literally, we enabled them, I think, by, to me, after an attack like that, you aren't at the table. You have no say. You cease to exist. And here we are negotiating with them, and now they have a credible place in this discussion. Do you think that, that point is accurate?
Yeah, I think it's an accurate point. You have to factor in the hostages, which again, I can show you in war where there's actually few examples of this, where there's the president of your population in the enemy territory and in the tunnels, which actually factors on how you fight, how you if you have to negotiate what you're trying to do. And I actually believe that the first temporary ceasefire was the right thing to do to bring hostages home. I agree with you. I'll take a different view as a kind of as a war researcher. War is a contest of will. The United States and many other nations constantly sent Hamas messages that emboldened their will to continue to fight. Like, don't go to Rafah.
Yeah.
You can't do these things. Just that, for me, as a strategist, says to Hamas, just keep fighting. You might achieve your goal, which politically, again, political goals. Mm-hmm. Hamas's goal of this war is just to survive. Conduct October 7th and then survive the war. Then it's
a win.
It's a win.
Yeah.
Period. And to somebody try to convince you otherwise is just not, again, common sense of what the goals of war are. So they shouldn't have to see at the table. Absolutely not. give the hostages back unconditionally, or we're going to continue the operation and we'll get them back through military means. But for me, again, I think as I write the history of this war, which I will, in different variations, how many times governments, to include the United States, sent a message to Hamas on, look, we want to negotiate with you, or we're going to constrain the IDF, so just hold out and you might win. That's what you've seen, but
that's what they want to hear.
Yeah. But again, we can go through the transitions because the war has changed. Everything has changed during the war.
So how has it changed in your perspective each trip that you've went?
Each trip was different on where the IDF was in pursuing their goals, which didn't change. And as you know, I actually got to, as a war researcher, got to interview the prime minister who was setting the goals for the war. I got to interview the head of the IDF, who was then translating that into military goals, to the division commanders, all the way down to the soldier on the ground, which for me as a war researcher is very unique to have that level of an understanding of what are the goals of the war, what are the military strategies, which is different than kind of political strategy, like the military plan to achieve the political goal. How is that being implemented? What are the available resources? And then what is the political context? Because there's always a political context. This is the ideal, again, which is not backed up by history, is a belief that any other nation would have done it differently. The United States would have absolutely fought this war differently.
How so?
Because, again...
You're saying more aggressively.
More aggressively.
Significantly.
Again, going back to the invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, Panama, you name it. The history of war, the way you win a war is to do it quickly with overwhelming, that's not disproportionate, overwhelming force to achieve your goal quickly, which actually brings the war to an end faster.
Yeah.
This is what Russia tried to do in Ukraine, failed for reasons that I studied. This is what militaries do. You don't encircle an area, tell them you're coming, and then slowly make your way to the enemy. Yeah. No, you use overwhelming surprise, speed, and force. The American military would have put way more combat power, would have bombed more, which is a hard thing for people to acknowledge. And if I'll fight a 4-star general, whatever, because I've done the work. Somebody say the opposite. There were 4,000 rockets launched out of Gaza in the opening hour of October 7th. Any other nation of the world has the right, and if they have the capability, to stop that, to stop the rockets emanating out of enemy territory.
Yeah.
So if this would have happened, and there are other people who have done, I won't even do the numbers comparison, right? So if you take the numbers of, 250 hostages, if you take that comparable to per capita, I won't even do that.
Yeah.
If this would have happened on a U.S. border, the U.S. military would have launched overwhelming, we have divisions that can be in places within 18 hours, overwhelming force to, one, stop the rockets. So we would have put everything we have in the sky and to ensure not one rocket came out of enemy territory headed towards Los Angeles. And then we would have launched immense combat power, because if you give the defender time,
I mean, this is really 1+1. I mean, you only have to be in kindergarten, perhaps pre-1-8, to start figuring out what you would do. I think I've said this recently. I think that the wise people of our generation pretend to be so smart and so philosophically brilliant that they try to make really, really simple things really complicated, when in fact they're really, really not. Falling into that trap, sometimes things are complicated and do need wisdom, but falling into the trap of how to handle certain very basic scenarios by some Ivy League, professor explaining to you how to do it is actually a big mistake.
There were governments who were saying there's another way. And I wrote this article in Wall Street Journal where
there's another way. Sorry for interrupting you, for everyone that's not in the situation.
That's right. And if you're not Israel, that there was another way to bring the hostages home. That defies the complete history of Hamas or any other terrorist organization taking hostages from Israel and what Israel is willing to give to get them back. So the idea that you could have achieved your goals of bringing the hostages home a different way after October 7th, or removed Hamas. And I wrote an article because there's all these fallacies in war too, which are also about people forgetting about war. There's all these fallacies that, you can just use special forces or strategic intelligence-driven bombing to achieve your goals. Even though that's been disproven up till now, you believe that Israel had a different way to do it. I'm telling you, there was a different way to do this. quickly.
Yeah.
With overwhelming force.
It's funny because Trump actually said this much earlier. Not like, I don't know his acumen regarding war. I'm not saying it's per se that high, but just the theory was this. It's like, just get things done. Like,
right.
go. Like,
I mean,
yeah.
And I can, General McMaster, Petraeus, others, there are some nuances where they think that things could have been done differently, but nobody that I view credible thought there was another way to get the hostage back and destroy this enemy than to enter his terrain and take his capabilities away, his rockets, his arms, his fighters, his leadership. It's just like, it's crazy. Even to your idea, which is what I'll get to push back from, there's all these counterinsurgency, because we've lived in a world of counterterrorism and counterinsurgency who believe like, well, you're creating more terrorists by what you're doing. Like, you're misapplying a theory in a body of work onto high-intensity urban warfare against a defending enemy. It doesn't work that way. Afterwards, absolutely. Yeah. After you remove Hamas from power, there are things you have to do to build stability, to build de-radicalize, demilitarize, reconcile, like all these things. But the insanity was people were telling governments that there was another way.
Yeah. What do you think are the most frequent lies that are being told about the Israeli campaign right now, in Gaza?
There's been a long list, to be frank. The number one lie is that Israel is intentionally causing harm on the Gazan population.
You obviously don't believe that's true.
No.
Why?
Because I've been on the ground. So two reasons. One is because I don't look to social media to get my information. To be honest, I mean, I don't, to include mainstream media looking to, but John, these videos, or John, this person from on the ground in the area says this, like, what are you saying? I went there embedded with the idea, watched what they were doing from my lens of knowing what military should be doing in urban warfare. It's that ideal that Israel is intentionally causing harm isn't backed up by everything that Israel has done, to include the evacuations, which when Israel did it, so one of the biggest ways you can protect civilians in urban warfare is to get the civilians out of the urban areas. The biggest challenge to Israel is that Egypt said, not on my watch. And Egypt said not one person can come temporary, get out of harm's way. So Israel had to find a way to do that. But as soon as Israel did evacuation notices, which what every other military has done who actually cares, U.S. military being one of the few, because if we talk about Russia or others, is that because they had the ability, evacuated the cities. But in October, when Israel said, northern Gaza, evacuate towards this area, the world, and this was something different, the world said, you can't do that. You can't evacuate 1 million people.
Ethnic cleansing? I think that's where they went, right?
They went all over the place. And they said, you can't do that. Like, what do you mean I can't do that? Like, that's the right thing to do. So that's the first bit of evidence, because TikTok videos are not evidence.
The biggest problem that I find is that all the talkers and the chirpers, as I call them, have no alternative solution other than just don't fight.
That's right.
Like, that's their outcome. So if anything happens to a civilian, it's such misplaced empathy. I mean, it's not even misplaced empathy, because that would be, in my opinion, being very generous as to their intentions. I would say it's such blatant anti-Semitism. That's really the truth, because if this happened in America, there wouldn't be one person who would, I think, sit there and say, effectively don't fight.
Yeah, don't fight.
And if anyone's going to die, then sorry, you can't do this, because there's no other alternative that's being given. So
one of the other alternatives that I've heard, which again, because I had done the research, is don't bomb. So send your military into that urban area, but don't bomb it at all, which is actually this whole field of work that had been growing before this war, is an ideal that people believe you could enter an urban area and fight an enemy without bombing it at all. There's actually this giant initiative that I argued against at the United Nations in 2018.
Why do you feel that that's not possible?
From the history of urban war, from the fact that I can teach you to turn every building
right.
So and it actually has happened in war, where military is out of humanitarian interests said, okay, no bombing the city before you enter it. And then what happens is that you have a house to house, block by block destructive war, and you lose thousands of soldiers as well.
Yeah.
See, the idea that a military could fight an urban battle without, which is what the this initiative called the Explosive Weapons in Populated Areas Initiative it says don't use bombs, missiles, artillery, or mortars in your fights. Like you militaries have your fights, but don't use any of those things in the urban areas because it's really destructive.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make common sense.
Yeah.
I argued that they would actually, which I've been proven true, I argued that if you do that, then you'll see more destruction in cities. Because if I know there's an enemy in a building in front of me, like as an infantry soldier, like I can see the building, I can see the enemy in the building. If I can't drop a bomb on the building, which is legitimate and legal by every means, I have to send a soldier forward, and I'll lose a lot of soldiers trying to get into that building to get to the enemy who's now behind concrete and everything.
Yeah.
The idea is it's maddening that people who don't know anything about the military believe that a military could fight. Just don't use your bombs.
It's obviously ridiculous on its face. There's no question, about that. But again, I don't think a lot of these people are I don't think they spent 1 minute really, in your shoes or in any regard, of any knowledge of the military. So it sounds like a nice thing to them. It feels good,
That's why you should look at the back. So of the people who have been, but they started in November, but then they started getting the data that they needed to argue that Israel's doing this on purpose.
Yeah.
You look into their backgrounds and who are they?
Yeah.
What are they experts in?
Remember the one where they were talking about how Israel was shooting point blank into kids in their heads? And what was like the outcome of that? Like all the X-rays they were showing was like disproved by basically every single military expert. They're like, it's not possible. Like the person, like this is a fake picture.
Yeah. And I've gotten asked like, look, I'm an expert in urban warfare, but experts in ballistics and just what a bullet does to humans, let alone a child, when it enters them. It isn't like those pictures were saying.
It's not as neat, you're saying.
That is not as neat at all.
Yeah.
There's so many elements to it, but I mean, the lies got bigger and bigger. But then they started doing, which I think we should talk about, comparative analysis.
Yes.
So by November, people are saying like, this is the most amount of bombing that's ever been done. Or this is more bombing, dumb bomb. Like there's so many elements of this where apples to oranges.
Yeah.
Or aggregating data and disaggregating data. An example of that would be comparing that one battle that I told you about, the Battle of Mosul, which was the biggest battle since World War II with a military trying to follow the law of war. It was the biggest battle, like I said, because of 2 years. So they started comparing numbers against Gaza. So Gaza, Hamas had 30,000 fighters. Just Hamas, not the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Lion's Den, or any other civilian who picks up a weapon and becomes a member of the hostilities, what we call a participant in the hostilities. In these other battles, there's 3,000 fighters, 5,000 fighters, but they're comparing it against a war. So that's where they aggregate the data, like of a war, and disaggregate it against a single battle in time. And that's what they started doing. Like, I forget who it was. Bernie Sanders said, more destruction than the Battle of Dresden. Because he was disaggregating data and aggregating.
Yeah.
So this is like there's 20,000, which took years to come to a number in the bombing of Dresden, which today would be unlawful because what we said after World War II is that we wouldn't bomb civilians anymore to try to get them to convince their governments to give up. We killed 180,000 in a single night in the firebombing of Tokyo. Yeah. Before the dropping of nuclear weapons.
I actually I was thinking about that earlier.
Yeah.
Obviously you hear people now say how what we did was so terrible, etc. But again, these opinions all come, 80 years later without an understanding of what was happening in that moment. Yep. And how it's easy to say how the U.S. is so crazy for dropping the bombs on, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when if you just pay attention to how what the actual situation was, which is different than your intellect of what it looks like in your mind now of what it was 80 years ago, but versus what it actually was, where we would have had to invade Japan, and we would have had a minimum of 1 million American soldiers die. Yep. So it's very easy now. This is what always drives me crazy, to sit there and look at it. Hindsight's 2020. Leave out everything that was going on geopolitically in the world, and the fact that World War II was going on for 5 years at that point, and Pearl Harbor. I mean, you could leave and just come down as if, from your ivory tower now and be in 2024 when you're sitting comfy, in your house, and be like, oh, by the way, we're terrible, terrible, terrible people for our actions in World War II, without obviously having the ability to. So, do you think those were a mistake? Like, I get that we created all these laws of war, and I'm sure some of them are very good because they prevent from clear, actual terrible things happening to civilians. But are some of these laws just counter to an actual good thing that could actually happen?
It's a great question, actually, and I think it gets to the heart of. I believe so. The laws of war were created. They're actually very old, and then they evolved over time as societies evolve, where we want to put limits on the brutality of war. But if anybody thinks there's a war that there won't be massive amounts of destruction, death, to include civilian death, then they're just irrational, because war is pursuit of political goals. Warfare is fighting. It is death. It is destruction. But we as a world, as in the global community, agree to things in time, like chemical warfare. Like, okay, we will not do these things.
Yeah.
I believe in the laws of war. Actually, I want the laws of war upheld. So like when Russia steals babies out of Ukraine, or when Russia bombs a theater full of verified women and children, no military objective, I want there to be global outcry that we're not following the laws of war that we all agreed to. We're in an age, though, where, in the age of mistrust, right? Post-COVID mistrust of any government institution. Of course, we really mistrust Israel. They're evil. That you get people making up laws of war. And then you get people making up the history of the war. I agree those actions in World War II were just. Absolutely. I also agree that after World War II, we evolved in our thinking of, even like I said, the real big example is like the bombing of civilians. Although legally, the dropping of the nuclear weapons was never decided legal, illegal within the law of war. They actually came to a decision of like, we'll agree to not fully rule on this, that the pursuit of greater good.
Yeah.
I personally believe that this is the ideal. Again, war is human, that there is evil in this world.
Yes.
There is evil men who rise to power, evil people who have, this again goes to all the irrationalness of placing our values on other people. Yeah, if you believe that we should never have a war, that's great. If you believe that we should never have fighting, warfare, that's great. But the irrationalness is to believe that there isn't evil in this world. There aren't people with evil intentions. And this goes back to Gaza. Hamas, as a political organization and as a military, has never said that I'm resisting so I can have a two-state solution, so I can live in harmony side by side with the Israelis, or that I can have a better life for my people. That organization, that evil, in my term, says that they want to kill all the Jews on the planet and destroy Israel as a nation. But we live in a world where Godsod and Jordan Peterson and others have said, like, you want so badly in yourself to fight for the oppressed, that you misplace who is the oppressed and the oppressor, who is good, who is evil, and what they actually say. This is, again, even in this war, but I can take you to other wars of like, well, why don't you listen to what they say they want? Not
just read.
Yeah.
It's it's like when someone, at a certain point, when someone says enough things, believe what they say. There's a quote like that, like
what they do.
Well, you believe what they do. Yeah, like I apologies, I screwed up the quote, but the basic idea is like, if there's a bad person who tells you he's going to do something bad, trust him. Like, believe him. Don't like sit there and say, oh, he probably doesn't mean it. They've showed you enough times that they do mean it previously. So that type of idea. You mentioned before that this fight right now in Gaza is the most, perhaps in history, because of the terrain and everything and the way it was built up, is the most difficult urban warfare scenario that you've seen, perhaps. Could you explain exactly why that is compared to, let's say, Fallujah or Mosul?
Sure. So the one reason is just the political context, where wars are fought within the political context of the time. So the fact that it's fought within this anti-Semitic, algorithm-driven social media world with organizations who have been investing billions of dollars for that moment means from day one, it's more difficult. But even from a military perspective, and that's what you can't separate military from political. For a political context, Israel has to fight with allies. So we could go into like, what could it do in Gaza? Well, Hezbollah was attacking, Iran was attacking, Houthis are attacking. It needed international support. It needs allies. So that's going to mean what it can do in Gaza is different than what other people in other wars had the option to do. From a military context, most difficult because of the rockets. So a war you're fighting with rockets going over your head, headed to your home. Hostages. A war being fought with the hostages inside the combat environment. The density of the urban areas. Although there was a lie saying that Gaza is the densest place on earth. That's a lie. Like I study cities for a living. It's not even in the top 100. No matter how you gerrymander the density in a single part of Gaza. But the tunnel complexes. So 300 to 400 miles of tunnels under every structure of the combat area, going from just underneath buildings to over 200 feet underground where no military munition could reach. I can't find another example where there's an urban area prepared for war for 20 years with a city underneath it prepared for war, only military purpose. Because people forget that. Because I had just come out of Ukraine as well, where the civilians seek refuge in the subways and in tunnels. Everything. All 2.2 million of the people of Gaza could fit in that 400 miles of tunnels with ease.
Really?
With ease.
That's
but not one is allowed in it. When I was in Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of civilians in Kyiv, in Kharkiv, and other areas were in the tunnels escaping the bombardment of munitions. The density, but also the preparations being done. So every step you take in Gaza is more likely than not that there's an enemy tunnel underneath you. And I felt that in Khan Yunis, in Netzarim corridor, in Gaza City, wherever I was.
Wow.
There's more likely when you're taking this step. Again, I can't find any history where that's the case, let alone the challenges of what we call combat in hell, which is urban warfare, where there's a million windows around you and there's an enemy could be in every window. And this is what Hamas did, was it prepared every building. Every other building has a bomb in it, munitions in it. The lawfare, more difficult, right? So I teach urban warfare as well.
I want to ask one thing. In actuality, do you believe Israel is taking more measures than anyone else even would with regards to trying to mitigate civilian harm?
So that's a good question because you added the word would. I don't see, and I hope that no other military is faced with the challenge that there is nowhere for the civilians to completely get out of the combat area because Egypt, and I'll say that, I'll keep saying it.
You think they're not holding Egypt accountable?
Nobody's holding Egypt to account.
Why should they take them in?
For the humanitarian reasons and because they signed actual declarations to say they would. The African refugee policy, there's all a history of that. Because in every other case, if their countries allow for civilians to escape the combat areas. I mean, you take Ukraine, over 3 million within the first few months have gotten out of combat areas and trying to get to safety. If you say what I have said publicly, and I've gotten a lot of criticism for it, but it's a fact as understanding what anybody's ever done. Israel has taken more measures to protect civilians in war than any military has in history.
Wow.
Period. And that's not debatable.
And you're getting criticism just because.
And there's a bunch of these,
say it.
Let's just say misinformed people who try to argue against me in that statement. And then they'll take little segments of what I say. But by what Israel has done in every element, not just the fact that it evacuated cities and the way it evacuated with the phone calls and the voicemails and the drones on with speakers on them and all these other, but by how they constrain the use of their force, how they use facial recognition technologies, all these things. What people will do, and this is where Where I'm more concerned for other nations is the numbers game.
Yeah.
Which is what they do. We call that effects-based analysis. So they don't care what John Spencer says that Israel has taken more steps. They say, John, that's ridiculous. Look at the number of civilians that have died. That means Israel hasn't done more. Like, no, that's
I think part of the problem, sorry to interrupt, is just there's no actual number of civilians versus combatants. I mean, that's just like step one. The number keeps on being thrown out. Yeah. And I always just keep on thinking to myself, hold on 1 second. You keep on saying 45,000 civilians have been killed, but that's not true.
Nope.
It's
a lie.
Even they admit that. Like, they'll say, like, there's no discrepancy between combatants.
Yeah.
So I don't even understand how that's...
And I don't want... again, before this war, I've never heard anybody ask a military during the war, hold up, what's your civilian to combatant ratio? That's just not a question. It's not the way the law of war works. But this effects-based condemnation, if you let me go back to it,
Please.
because the numbers are a big factor into it, where they'll say, I don't care what you say or what the IDF say or what anybody else says. I only care about what the effects of the war are. And that's going to be, man, and it's gotten really bad where it gets taken into national discussions. Like, look, how can you say they're protecting civilians when this many civilians have died? How can you say that they're not trying to destroy the city? Look at these aerial photos. Look at these numbers of bombs dropped. Look at this. Completely out of context of the military objective or what was happening at that moment or what the law of war actually says on proportionality, necessity, distinction. If we live in a world where all I have to do is give you a number and that means you have to stop.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very violent world, in my opinion. Yes, we can get to the fact that from the very start, every number given by the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas, the Hamas Gaza Health Ministry is really unique. Like, when did we start listening to terrorists? And that being the sole credible source of information is the terror. I don't care what Israel or anybody else or the United States or anybody else. It's what does Hamas say about it? There's never been a war that I've ever studied where anybody's ever been able to tell you how many civilians are dying on a daily basis, period, let alone to the single digit, which is what Hamas has this magical capability to do. It can tell you within an hour, within minutes of a strike, exactly the number of civilians that have died. They can't tell you how many combatants died. Most people can't even tell you what the difference between a civilian and a combatant is in war. They don't know the fact that a civilian can turn themselves into a combatant. You pick up a weapon, you hold hostages in your house. You're not a civilian. You're a combatant and I can kill you on sight. Like, it's crazy that we're living in this world where what's your civilian to combatant ratio? Like, I can show you every urban battle in history where they don't know.
They have no idea.
They have no idea, or they don't know for years afterwards. So like the Dresden, they didn't know for a decade later. Because they argued, like, it's this number, this number.
Isn't in Mosul there's, like, still a dispute about how many? Is that true?
Well, eventually, somebody will come in and go, that's it, and then, media attention will go away. Yes, in the Battle of Mosul, which is, again, this biggest battle since World War II, a year after the battle, not during it, a year after, they still did not know how many civilians. And the number ranged from 9,000 to 40,000.
Wow. So
PBS is on the ground, because somebody wants a citation. They don't believe John Spencer. But PBS is on the ground asking Iraqi officials how many civilians died here. Like, well, we're still uncovering. We really don't know. But the ideal that you would know during the battle is the insanity. Like, we can argue about, okay, combatant to non-combatant. Like, well, how would you know? Whoever's counting, if that person was partaking in the hostilities, well, how about his name? Is the person on your list, is that a member of the other military? Then can we agree that that's a combatant?
Yeah.
Because if you're a combatant, and most people, again, they have no idea about war. Like, you don't have to be shooting at me in war for me to kill the combatant. You can be an enemy military sitting asleep and I can kill you because that's the way the law of war works. But this is the insanity. There has been some people that I actually have some respect for that have lost their mind on this whole civilian to combatant, who can be targeted.
Who's an example of that?
unfortunately, and I have a lot of respect for him, Joe Rogan was an example of that.
I was wanted to ask you this actually very, very much. It's so interesting. It's very funny because you haven't been on
I've not been on Joe.
I went and I looked. I'm like, please tell me that John, you've been on, because I knew that you were on Jocko's. So I went to Joe's, but I saw you weren't there yet. First of all, he should absolutely have you because
I have a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, obviously he's talking and he's keeps on going in and out. You know, if he speaks to Dave Smith, who, oh my God, don't even get me started there in the absolute lunacy of that guy. And then he'll go on with Coleman Hughes, who's great. And like you see him like not sure where to be, but then he'll just be like, they're just bombing him out of the sky, you know, and he's saying these things, and I'm just like, okay, why don't you pick up the phone and actually speak to someone like John Spencer? This is what I was thinking. I think I even mentioned your name on a podcast of mine a few weeks ago because I was talking about Piers and like his dumb questions. That Piers likes to be a moderate. He likes to portray himself as a moderate when in reality, to me, he's just not really super intelligent, but that's just a different discussion.
Well, even on Piers. So I was on Piers twice.
But he'll just ask the same exact question again.
But I was on Piers about Ukraine. Interesting that Piers doesn't want to talk to me about Israel-Gaza.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I literally said, I'm like, instead of asking dumb questions on Twitter or writing, the war needs to stop, too many deaths, why don't you just call up John Spencer and just ask him what the situation is? Like, this guy's he's U.S. Army major. You don't, just not.
So the one example, and I want to give Joe credit because like you said, he'll have lots of people, but the one example is he showed a video and of 4 Gazans walking in a field and Israel strikes it and says, clearly unarmed civilians. There's so many problems with that video, and that just got saw by millions of people. And then you adding your interpretation of what you just saw and saying, of course.
So what would you tell him if you were sitting there and he showed you that video?
One, I would say that just because they're not carrying weapons doesn't mean that those aren't members of Hamas, combatants who just did something like planted a bomb, just dropped a weapon and are moving to a different location to pick up their other weapons, or just by the, again, deduction, right? So let's take what we know about this video. All right, there's 4 individuals in a combat scenario that Israel directly strikes. So it wasn't an accident. Do you believe, and that's the inference, that Israel knew that they were civilians and decided to kill them?
So I think part of the problem is that, that's a great question. That's obviously exactly where the question needs to be asked. But I think part of the problem is that he speaks to so many people that he has so many people in his ear. Yeah. And a guy like Dave Smith, who he's friends with, will sit there and say, absolutely, Israel would, an IDF soldier would go point blank and just shoot him in the head effectively. He has equated the IDF, Dave Smith, with Hamas. He believes it's equal footing. There's absolutely no difference in values and in morals. So Joe is friends with a guy like that, let's just say. So he's hearing that in his ear, and then he's friends with other people, Ben Shapiro, you'll have Coleman, a litany of other people, and they'll be speaking something else in his ear. So I can understand why for him it becomes, and what was fascinating, I'm sure you saw when he spoke to Coleman about it, Coleman was like, slow down, and he very calmly, I like him a lot, I'd love to get him on the show. I would love to get him on this.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of respect for him. He's very impressive young guy, and he's not that old. I thought originally he was a little older. I thought he was like in his low 30s. He's not even 30. He's like 20.
He's so, I've met with Coleman, and he's so curious. So this is, the thing is, I don't mind asking a question if you legitimately you're trying to learn. This is critical thinking that we've lost. Yeah. Right. So
you
again,
saw him on The View.
I did see him on The
View. I ate that up. That was my breakfast, lunch, and supper that day. But anyways, so then he's listening to Coleman, and Coleman is giving the other side, and Joe's like, that's interesting. And like you see him like not sure. But yeah, no, it was pretty interesting. I was pretty surprised. Also, Joe Rogan is like, he's the type of guy that is like a balls to the wall type of dude that you would almost think is like, it's just a misunderstanding of the facts on the ground. Like, I think if he knew the facts, he wouldn't even.
But it isn't even the facts on the ground. It's a misunderstanding of war.
That's true.
And he has a lot of he's had Jocko, he's had Andy Stump, he's had like a bunch of warriors on. So let's replace the actors.
Where's Jocko on this topic?
So Jocko had made some comments about Ramadi, his experience, right? So looking through his lens, but I actually did, 3.5 hours with him, giving him the variables. That's what I respect about Jocko. He learns. He loves learning, studies, reads, wants to know the on the ground facts, just listens, doesn't form his opinion. Yeah. I didn't ask him he listened to mine.
Yeah.
And then we talked through the variables, like, and it becomes, once you start to break like we have, like, okay, what's the size of the enemy? What's the situation of the enemy? What's the terrain? What are the goals? What does the enemy do to get civilians killed? What is enemy activity? He has a deeper understanding of the military context to go like, oh, that's wild. Is when you have somebody who has no understanding of even the military context of what the realm of possible is, like a Dave Smith, like, let's remove Israel that you hate out of this equation.
Yeah.
Let's put anybody else, an American military following the laws of war.
Well, he hates the American military as
does
well.
as well, right? So who do we use?
It's just a warped way of thinking, in my opinion, at the end of the day. So you're not going to, if night is day and day is night, you're not going to be able to speak to the person. It doesn't really make a difference until, there's a famous line, that gets said, unfortunately, but it's like a guy like Dave Smith, he's not going to be saved on the way to the gas chambers. Like, that's the idea, you think you're Jewish, bro. They hate you. Hamas, they want to kill you as well. That's right. You can try to give all your reasons of how Israel's the occupier, whatever it is. There's no negotiating right here, dude. And he wants to equate it and try to pretend like he's a noble, right, empathetic based person that's, so caring and so deeply loving for so this is what the outcome you're going to come out with. You're not going to be able to speak reason. I think you would probably agree with this, that there are certain conversations with certain people you're just talking to a brick wall. You're never going to get anywhere, and thereby it's probably better not even engaging in it. Right. What's the purpose?
Right. Well, I'll talk to somebody who is willing to have a discussion, even if you're, you just want human life to be saved.
Yes.
This is the other kind of argument. I just want the war to stop. I want the killing to stop. Again, the history of the actors, the war, whatever, you believe that if this just stops, all the killing stops.
Yeah.
Or that the people of Gaza's lives get better. Yeah. How was the life of the Palestinian people under Hamas? It starts to I'm a rational, critical thinker. You already have a bias, so you want to discuss it through
to fit it into that box of your bias.
It makes it really hard, but I deal in the world of war. So that's why for Joe, I just do you understand what the law of wars are? And so take away the actors. In this scenario, what do we say is legal? I just want the killing to stop. I think everybody could agree to that. But this is the idea of in the war, that would lead to a better outcome.
Yeah.
These are all these fallacies that are in that, nobody should ever fight a war.
Yeah, no.
That's not a reality that's ever going to happen.
I'm 100% with that. I had a couple of other questions I wanted to run to. First of all, I just want to get your overall thoughts about Israel's war against Hezbollah. Because I wrote on X the other day, I feel like this is not talked about enough because it was literally it was just a castration, it kind of felt like. But the specifics of the pager incident, that entire operation, and I'd love for you to talk about the pager, the terrorist pager operation. Is that something you've ever seen before fought as effectively?
No. And I wrote that. Again, everybody wants a framework in which to understand. I think that's one of the challenges. It's just so foreign to people to understand things. So everybody wants a framework in which to understand. That's where I try, I have my framework of how to understand war, military action. And for the pager operation, I had the framework of what's ever been done before like that. There have been other situations where, you've snuck a bomb into a camera and the camera goes off, or a cell phone. There's been situations where a terrorist or an enemy has something in his hand and you blow it up. That's not new. But for this, to be able to get into an enemy, call them terrorists, I call them enemy, an enemy military's logistical supply line, and insert an explosive into their communication devices that they ordered for themselves.
They paid you for also.
Yep, paid you for I think they said at a good price.
Yeah, I actually heard that.
It's unparalleled in military history. One, by the level of the intelligence that it required, the intelligence operation to design a company, to have the enemy ordered from you their devices that they would only hand out to themselves. So this gets you to the whole legality of it. The terrorist, the military, ordered a military communication device for their military personnel and were using it. There's no more legal way to distinguish between A civilian carrying that device, a military. It's ordered by the military for the military. Yeah. But to do it over this scale, geographic area, because those pagers exploded across Lebanon, Syria, anywhere where the terrorists had it, simultaneously. So 3,000 plus devices rigged to blow at a single push of a button. They go off so that you'll bring them to your face, and then they explode. Yeah. I can't, from the military deception, it kind of like the breaking of the Enigma during the German code breaking machine, or D-Day, the surprise of D-Day. That level of surprise, but the level of actual intelligence required to conduct that and get it into their hands, how many times it could have gone off, it's unparalleled, but also effective. So not only from the physical harm it caused on the enemy, I mean, you just couldn't dream as a military to have them carrying something that explodes on them versus trying to find them and then hit them. But the psychological impact of the fact that the pager blew and then the next morning the walkie-talkies blow, which were 10 years in the making, psychologically, the enemy can't trust a single piece of their equipment. Yeah. It's
debilitating.
It's debilitating, but it's almost like there's no price or calculation of the damage it does to the military.
It's not a person dead, you're saying. It's
all right, because war is a contest of will. So yes, I harmed them. I actually revealed them. So in Hezbollah, one of the ways they thrived is by not being known, right? So that's where, when the pages went off, Hezbollah put out the notice, like, stop putting photos of wounded people because you're revealing who's in the military, the Hezbollah military, because they're carrying the military device only given to the military. But then to follow that up the same week with one of the most strategic, discriminate decapitation campaigns of any military. Within 2 weeks, Israel has eliminated the entire organizational chart to include Nasrallah.
Yeah, that was pretty wild.
Who is like historic as even in the Middle East for the Islamic regime in Iran. But it wasn't just him, although that was an impressive operation to be able to get into him. Somebody who prides himself on his ability to stay hidden.
His evasiveness. How did they get him? How did they know where he was?
Years of intelligence work into Hezbollah to know when he moved, where he was headed to, who he'd be surrounded by. And then they dropped a bunch of precision-guided bunker-busting munitions on the bunker he was in.
Did they know where he was for, let's say, a few weeks before that already, and they were just tracking him? Or was like, or you have no idea, I'm just curious. Or and you can't say.
No. I mean, I only do unclassified research.
I have no idea.
So I use, like everybody else, what has been revealed. But I know that, again, going to Piers Morgan's dumb question, the difference between Hamas is that Hamas was left to itself. Israel withdrew in 2005 and reduced its intelligence capabilities. Hezbollah was a very infiltrated organization by Israel's intelligence sources, and it lives in a multicultural society where people will take money to tell you information about Hezbollah.
So they were viewed as being a much stronger army. I mean, they were than Hamas.
They're a massive military, over 100,000 fighters, also embedded within the Lebanese political system. Like it's night and day organizations. But from a military history perspective, the pager operation, yes, unparalleled, and what should take its place in military history as one of the most effective intelligence operations against another military in history. Wow. But the decapitation campaign is also, I've never seen an entire military, because it's a terrorist organization, but it was a military. Every brigade commander, any financier, logistic, all eliminated within 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was almost too crazy while it was happening. What are your thoughts on Bibi and the way he's leading? Obviously, goes without saying, a controversial figure. You've spoken with him
multiple times.
Right? What are your thoughts about how he is leading since October 7th?
So I often tell people I don't do politics, but I do war. So war is political. I know within Israeli politics that he is a controversial person to either love him or hate him, much like many political leaders. From this war, he is, and this was my last interview just actually in a few weeks ago, of the decisions that he personally had to make during the war that I don't know if anybody else would have made the same decisions, made the same calls to other global political leaders, or made the same decisions even while under attack. I think he's a very impressive wartime leader.
Mm-hmm. I wrote this multiple times on my X. I have not seen. I think I saw one other person write it. It honestly might have been you. I'm not stealing a card from you. I don't know. It may have not been. I wrote them multiple times. I said Bibi is the Winston Churchill of our generation, and it's going to take years for people to realize. But I just think anyone great. It just goes without saying to me, is going to have tremendous controversy. I mean, they're just the political aspect of the world is going to create. Sometimes it's real and sometimes it's not. But I'm saying it doesn't really make a difference if it's real or not. It's going to be there. So, right, they're bringing him up on bribery charges or whatever. And obviously, the left hates him. I mean, the left are the people that got killed on October 7th. They probably right now, those same people are fighting with him for a ceasefire. A year ago, ceasefire. It's like, do you not learn anything yet? We get you hostages back, but as a leader, you need to make the right choice for your country,
for the nation.
I
agree.
So I mean, it's so, and that's the left in Israel. I mean, they're not that much different from the left here. I mean, it's unfortunately sad to say. It's
this is where again study within this war, the decisions he had to make, from everything from attack Hezbollah before attacking Hamas. Listen to the United States and don't respond to Iran's twice attacks, which are historic as well.
Yeah.
Don't do these, don't go to Rafah and still go in there. He has made decisions that have been proven to be the right decisions, even when people are surrounding him said, don't do that.
Yeah.
You have to judge him by his actions.
It takes real poise and guts. Like that level of pressure. I always say there are few people. Honestly, it's not about Trump, Bibi, but I was just telling someone, it's not even like, I'm not a Trump person. I'm just a Trump just I don't know, just use your brain. That's just basically the way I see the world. And unfortunately, somehow, Dave Portnoy said it best. The left gave us no choice. This wasn't, most people didn't vote for Trump. A lot of people voted against Kamala. If you were a leftist, you just were given no choice. And I was just telling someone, the pressure that a guy like Trump, love him, hate him, whatever it is, the pressure that this man's been under. Forget it, we could go 9 years, but I'm just saying in the last 3-4 years, what the duress that they've put him under. Talk about Ranger School, right? Where you take everything away from a man, I mean, 5 lawsuits. I mean, he's about to be in an orange jumpsuit. If he doesn't win the presidency, he's putting his life on line. He obviously almost got killed. Just that fortitude, period. And that resilience and just standing in there is unthinkable. I don't think there's anyone that really has an understanding, myself included. I can only imagine what that's like to go to sleep every single night knowing you have the brunt of the DOJ. I mean, but a lot of people, even if you want to say the DOJ, but who just want you dead. That's crazy.
Yeah, crazy.
How does someone gain that? That to me is like the ultimate. I think that ability of resilience is an ultimate skill.
Yeah, and I think this is about war is horrible, but it also put people to the test. It puts nations to the test. And we could go. We don't have the time. Why did October? I had
a couple of things, but go. No, I want to hear what you're saying.
Why did October 7th happen? War puts nations, societies make decisions that have consequences and complacency, and that's the democracies. They go where the people want them to go, to include how they spend their money. But war puts everything to the test, and it will put leaders to the test. And yes, now we have examples of people who, despite what they're doing to their nation, continue in a war. I give Putin as an example.
I want to talk actually about Russia-Ukraine, but go on.
Then you have leaders who rise to the moment. And again, war puts militaries to the test, nations to the test, and leaders to the test. And this is what you've seen in these wars, which leaders have risen to the test and which ones have failed. The actual outcomes, and this is where I don't get into projecting, and I hope you don't ask me a question where's this going? All these oracles that we have that can tell you what the future is. I'm like, well, how's this war going to end? And how's this going to go? And elections, I don't do that. I can tell you how it's gone or what's happening in this moment. I can tell you what's happened in the past, but it always puts these people to the test. So judge them on their actions, not on your hate of the individual or your politics.
I wanted to get into Russia, Ukraine for a minute because I know that we're talking obviously a lot of Israel. Naturally, I'm wearing a yarmulke, so I get that. But at the same point, very much wanted to discuss that because I know you went there first. Before, obviously,
Four
October
times
7th.
as well.
You went there 4 times as well. To wrap on the Israel topic,
Yep.
what do you think is the best method right now for Israel to close out this war? And how long do you expect that should take in a conservative, reasonable estimate?
Yeah. Again, you're asking me the questions that aren't answerable.
But what would be the best way?
Yeah,
You're appointed, Bibi calls you up, you're the head of the military right now.
Yeah.
What's the path?
I do believe the path. I would love for Egypt to help to get civilians. There are large swaths of Gaza that haven't been touched once by the IDF, out of humanitarian concerns, like the Al Mawasi humanitarian zone, to include cities within it, have not been touched by the IDF out of concern for the civilians that are there and what Hamas is trying to do to them. Egypt could absolutely help, as in, let's move the civilians to a place. When the war began, people would ask me, how long is this going to take? Like, in the question is also a trend of people believing that wars can be done quickly. There are examples, but in this situation, given all the context that we've talked about, if you thought this was going to happen quickly, it just wasn't backed up on what is the capability, the size of the IDF, just to clear the urban terrain. At this point, talking today, whatever the date stamp is on this, Israel would need more combat power than it currently has in Gaza, because they had to fight Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, had to send 4 division headquarters into there, and had 1 division headquarters in Gaza. But the IDF is not designed to fight any wars, really. They're designed to defend themselves, let alone do a long-term war like this. They need more combat power to actually start fully clearing areas, holding them, and rebuilding. This is the general Petraeus, which is backed up by history of war.
Yeah.
That if you want to remove that ideal that you were talking about, there's plenty of, I can kill an ideal. Like, ideals can be around, but they don't have combat power. ISIS, Nazis.
Yeah.
Do they own?
Are they in position of power, effectively?
Power? And do they have military capability? Because it does start to get into military capability. At this point, Israel needs to create a security environment where anything else can exist other than Hamas.
Yeah, they need someone else. But I told someone, I don't care if they're like, oh, but the next fringe group is going to come up. I said, I don't care if the next group is called Hummus, which is hummus. I said, it can be named anything else. It cannot be Hamas, because otherwise that's a victory. So for the sake of the world understanding, not just for Israel, but everyone should understand, to every country, that if this happens to a country, you will cease to exist after that's done. One
of the solutions is what Israel as a nation says they won't do. They won't occupy Gaza.
Right.
Which is, in post-conflict operations, whether it's you were there for the wrong reasons, you have to help stand up whatever else you want to be there.
Yeah.
This is why Israel has to, and they are designing it so where it can be done, right? They created the different corridors in Gaza, and they made it so you could establish, we call it the ink blot strategy. Take a small portion of Gaza, completely cleared of Hamas military capability, and then bring in the people, start to rebuild, provide them.
Problem. They don't have a leader. Why can't they get a...
They've had a couple. In that defense...
Their leader's a boss. He's busy paying out terror.
The pay-to-slave program.
Yeah, so it's like they need someone who's going to step up and actually...
And I think that's where they've been going with this. Like, they're waiting for that. And there's been a couple local Gazans who said, hey, I'm not Hamas, or I don't want to be Hamas, but Hamas still has enough power they behead that guy the next day. So you have to secure areas, which is, again, this is all very common military theory. The IDF haven't had the capability because they're in a 7-front war. We're getting to the point, if I was in the room with whoever saying, okay, what's the realm of possible right now in Gaza? Well, there's still areas that haven't been cleared. There's still 99 hostages. There's still, you got to take areas, hold them, and then start the process of reestablishing security. Because the really good quote that General Petraeus said, security might be 10% of your problem, or it might be 90% of your problem. But no matter what, it's the first percentage of your problem.
Got it.
So you got to provide security for that area, period. That's 101. Israel right now has been going in and out. They've been clearing.
Yeah.
They're not securing anything.
Why not?
because they don't have the capability to. Because Hamas is still, like, there's still rockets, like 2 days ago.
I mean, it slowed down considerably, but
Right. But there's still an enemy that has rocket capabilities, and they attack the Kerem Shalom.
How do you prevent that from happening? So you're saying you need another? Don't you need another leader in place? Like, okay, fine, Israel goes, clears it, securitizes it. Let's call it, not in the real estate form, but and then who's taking over? Who's going to run that area?
Well, so if I was to do this, and maybe I should write this. Okay, step one is everybody agree that Hamas never will have power again. And the world hasn't done that because Gaza isn't just an Israel problem. It's a world problem. Step one is to realize that Hamas, because that will send a signal to Hamas. Like, we, the world, and I'm talking Arab nations as well.
Yeah.
You, Hamas, you're not going to win this. You're not going to keep power in Gaza Strip, period. That's like step one. Step two might be like stop radicalizing the population. So you got to do away with UNRWA and the whole school system of.
Didn't they say they're stopping it just the other day or something?
The U.S. will hopefully cut the funding to it, but
I thought I just read that they're working on. No,
there's other nations like Canada doubling down. Like,
well, yeah, of course. They're doing
stop radicalizing them. You have to then start securing areas and holding them. So you want. I don't think there'll be one leader. So this is, again, there are plenty of historical case studies to show you can have many leaders in different areas in Gaza. And
localized.
This is localized. This is the ink blot. You want to be the leader of this neighborhood? I wrote a book called The Gangs of Baghdad. That was my job in Baghdad, was to go around to like Tony Soprano's in different neighborhoods and meet with them, like everything
working out there?
Everything quiet here? What do you need? And that was my job because the gangs of Baghdad, not the tribal leaders, they were like thugs, ruled the different neighborhoods and then recognized, like, yeah, over there's a national leader. There could be many leaders, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's going to take, that isn't months.
Yeah.
That's going to take IDF soldiers. This is what I've told Israelis. I'm scared that, personally, concerned, let's say, that Israel society says, we're done with Gaza.
I don't think that's going to happen, honestly.
That's what I get told. But I've seen nations do it before.
Again, if there was thousands and thousands, I'm speaking, perhaps this is a little bit not my place because I'm not an Israeli, but I'm speaking from a Jewish standpoint here. Jewish people are very unique people. What happened October 7th is not something that it's a collective shock to people's conscience that is not, it's not being forgotten by anyone that was alive that day that was above 6 years old that has an ability to remember. So it's not, will there be people that will be calling for it? Yeah, there were far left peaceniks who, were calling for the end one day later. Yeah. But the majority, I have a friend of mine that's was in the IDF, sergeant, the whole 9 yards. What's up, Izzy? And he's excellent. And he told me, he's like, all this talk about Bibi, this and that. He's like, I guarantee you right now, if they held an election, Bibi would win again. He's like, it's all just media BS. He's like, it's like in New York, in America, we know the left wing. He's like, it's the silent, it's the loud minority that's busy sitting there basically saying, Bibi's terrible, whatever. He's like, if Bibi did this, he'd win right now because at the end of the day, he has the support of the people. Most people will not stop this until there's a clear Hamas is not in power anymore. It's not happening.
Right, which is, again, why you need to show Israelis what is the future of this. Yeah. Because if IDF soldiers continue to die in Gaza, this isn't the I hate the day after plan. No. Like, what's the strategy? And you could say it's going to take a while in the operation. Are we going to start creating pockets of good and then allowing that to be rebuilt to show even Israelis that there is a path here? Or is it we're going to contain it, which is, I've heard that wanting to go back to, like, we've achieved mostly our goals. Like, let's just put up new barriers and keep them, let them, we're not going to govern them. We're not going to occupy, which is a bad term. So there's really some confusion on, okay, if IDF soldiers continue to die, but who's going to articulate what the goal is here other than what we all agree on, Hamas can't be in power?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I wanted to ask you, we have to get to Russia, Ukraine, but there's another thing, man. I know that we're running tight on time.
I
I got time also, but I don't know if everyone else here does. I don't even know what I paid for. I don't know what's going on. But okay, hold on. Iran, how are you handling Iran? If possible, in 60 to 120 second format.
Who am I? Am I in the United States?
No, you're Israel.
Israel is, again, this idea that Israel can survive in the world alone is never going to happen.
You think not possible? No. Okay. So if you're America.
Because any nation's power is their four forms of power: diplomatic, information, military, and economic. Yes, Israel will have to invest a lot more in its military, actually. But if you're a coalition of people like the United States, what do you do about the Islamic regime in Iran? And I try to separate the two. There's been a lot of work been done by Israel. And thanks to Israel, the Islamic regime in Iran is a lot less powerful than it was on October 6th. It's proxy armies of Hezbollah. It's highway of drugs, weapons, and everything through Syria. It's Hamas, Houthi. All these things are weaker than it's ever been. Its influence is a lot weaker. But the pursuit of the nuclear weapon, step one is stop giving the Islamic regime billions of dollars to not develop nuclear weapons while it develops.
Why would you do that?
But
it's just a stupid idea.
Yeah, and where did that billions of dollars go into? Oh, why is Hezbollah probably one of the richest militaries of the world?
Yeah.
Because Iran gave it money. Why does it have power over the Lebanese people? Step one is stop giving them money. Step two is sanction the crap out of them again. And again, facts are facts. When President Trump's administration sanctioned the Islamic regime in Iran with everything that they could, it was working to reduce their global export of terrorism. You have to roll back the nuclear program by decades. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
So there are some immediate steps that need to be done, but what's the ultimate thing you do is very complex geopolitical situation, because there are economic, regional, other concerns here. But step one, stop giving them billions of dollars to finance their caliphate ideals of using terrorism.
That's great insight, honestly. No, I'm serious. I'm always curious what someone like an army person's like who's not biased at all out of it, you know, how they see it. Russia. I know you went there 4 times.
I went to Ukraine. I don't think I'm welcome
yes,
Russia.
I don't think you're welcome Russia. I mean, Russia-Ukraine war.
I wrote a book on how to...
Yeah, how to defend their army, how to stop them from winning, which I heard you talk about actually in depth about how in the very early days was really a defining moment.
Yep.
As far as, which is, I don't think anyone really talks about that. I haven't heard it spoken about much. Do you believe the U.S. has any Biden's handling of the situation and us not making it clear that we won't allow Ukraine into NATO? Do you think that we helped influence that war in a negative way and we could have stopped it potentially?
One, I strongly believe that the narrative that Russia invaded Ukraine because of NATO is a Russia talking point that dumb people like Jeffrey Sachs and others have propagated.
Oh, you think it's not even true?
No.
I don't know a lot about this at all. So
it's not what, again, going back to listen to what they say. In Putin's speech on why he's invading Ukraine, NATO wasn't mentioned. That's a Tucker Carlson reinforced, like, oh, that's working. Yes, that's the reason that we did it. Like, that's a farce. If that was, so if Ukraine wanting to be a member of NATO was the reason that Russia invaded Ukraine, then Putin will take his mark in history as the worst strategic leader in the history of war, because thanks to his invasion of Ukraine, he increased his borders with NATO by 2. So with Finland joining NATO, Russia now has a greater border with NATO than it ever was going to have.
Right.
And with Sweden. But this myth of a handshake between people in the 90s on NATO would not expand Western. It was an ideal, but it wasn't the reason that Putin said he invaded Ukraine.
So you're saying you're taking him at his word, as you should, as we spoke about
and
before.
the history of the region. So from the Maidan Revolution of 2014 to the ideals that Ukraine would join the European Union and start to make its way Western. That in complete history, the people like Jeffrey Sachs want to erase. Like, none of that matters. Let's go to the 90s and then fast forward to 2022. Like, no.
Yeah, these people are just, I mean, the Jeffrey Sachs of the world just will argue the opposite of whatever is conventional wisdom just to be able to have an opposing.
Same thing with Putin. Like when Tucker Carlson interviewed Putin for like mindless numbers of hours, and Putin tries to rewrite the history going from like Peter the Great till now. Like, it's insanity. Like,
Is it? I don't know the history, so that's why
it's insanity.
I'll tell you one thing I was telling someone. I'm like, obviously the government, which I think is not okay, was trying to make sure Tucker. See, that's the problem that we have, that the government actively did suppress Tucker's ability to really go to Russia to a large degree, and they clearly were trying to make sure that Putin's voice wasn't heard. For whatever reason that is, I don't think that is a winning strategy. That's not the concept of free speech, and that's why it never ever ends up really working. And that you give the leeway now to all the Tuckers and all those people to say we're the ones not allowing them to even speak. Why? Because we're scared of X, Y, and Z and us looking bad, or whatever comes after that. And then Tucker obviously decides that Russia's the greatest moral authority in the world and everything about them is better. That's the funny part about where it goes. Which
but even like, again, I'm an academic critical thinker. Like, fine, that's Putin's version of history. So who else has interview like Michael McFaul or Timothy Snyder or somebody else?
The other side, you're saying.
What's the history of this conflict?
So I was telling someone, I was going back. I lost my train of thought, but I was telling someone how. I'm all for free speech. Everyone. We should interview everyone. And then I'm listening to this Putin thing. I'm like, I get why they didn't want him to talk. Like, this guy who just went for, took the interview. He played Tucker. Yeah. He put that conversation the way he's brilliant. He's a chess player.
No, nobody's ever said he's not. But okay, look, on the day you invaded, you said you were denazifying Ukraine. You were liberating Russians.
Yeah.
Like, what part of this was about NATO? Yeah, but they were breaching towards my border. Well,
so you're saying it has nothing to do.
Nothing.
He's just ultimately a dictator that is, no matter what, is going to go.
Yeah. So again, I'm not a Ukraine-Russia expert, but I've done enough critical thinking. And the facts of the ground is that Russia invaded because it couldn't have a prosperous nation, former satellite nation, on its borders. When its regime, kind of like the Belarus 2.0, was no longer under its doing what it wanted, and it couldn't, and this whole idea that the CIA orchestrated the Maidan Revolution, all this, again, the conspiracy theory. Listen to the man's words.
Yeah.
It doesn't, he personally, Tutin Tucker told Ukraine doesn't exist as a nation. Its people don't exist as a people. They are Russian. I just liberating the Russians.
I hear that. Would you, if he agreed to a ceasefire now, and would mean Ukraine would have to cede territory that it's lost, would you say that's a deal that Ukraine should take, or is that reinforcing poor behavior, call it?
That's a decision for Ukraine to make. I think it is reinforcing a new rules. Right? This is what John McCain said about, you let him take southern Georgia. You let him take Crimea. You think
just a dangerous precedent to set.
Yeah. So he invaded Ukraine because he wanted it. He failed to take it. So he's going to try to, I wrote this in the Wall Street Journal recently about this idea that all wars ended at a peace table with both sides negotiating terms. No. There are wars that are born of unilateral victory. You tried, you failed, I won.
Yeah.
It's up to them whether...
Is it a winnable war? Could they even get back what they lost? At the end of the day, if you can't win, if there's no path to victory, so then
you get to the
problematic.
You get to the Winston Churchill moment, right? So if all reason, this is the idea again about numbers. Like, who says they can't win? Because you're running the numbers of what Russia is able to amass versus what Ukraine can, and who's investing, and how much.
They're going to have to claw the territory back now that they lost,
yep.
Which seems like a decent swath. The question is, I think it would be, is it a win if they still exist as a country? I think that is a win.
I would.
So that's
why Russia lost this war
in
April of 2022. It then changed, which is what he did in April, changed the strategic objectives. Like, I just wanted Eastern Ukraine. And I wanted a portion of southern Ukraine too, because that's really economically viable. I don't know. That's Ukrainians' decision on what they can live with to stop the war, with some security guarantee. Again, going back to the security guarantees people have given Ukraine in the past, which is really problematic to think about. I don't know if that leads to peace. This is the ideal that just give Putin this, he'll
same thing you're saying with Israel and the Palestinians. We'll give you Gaza and it'll be peaceful, and it never works.
Right. So if you give Putin Eastern Ukraine, that's all he'll then he's all of a sudden the great person that people want him to be. Then again, that's not rational. That's not historic of his time.
Yeah.
Because what happens?
The facts simply don't show that at all.
No,
it's just
facts. Yeah, the facts and everything that he does in every other area, like, it doesn't make rational fact. Yes, people have to make hard decisions, and this is again, that's a situation where that country makes that decision. It will factor into like, well, if nobody supports them, can they continue to fight? And then you'll have to make these decisions. But just from a rational perspective, to say like, just if we made a deal today and he said that was okay, that's all good. We just want the killing. And I love Elon. Elon's done this too. Like, we just want the killing to stop. Like, of course.
I think Elon is more saying that from the standpoint, again, who am I to speak for him, but I'm saying just from more the standpoint, like, okay, is it practical right now that they can, regroup and get back to the actual borders, Russia, the original borders? If so, I think most people would say keep fighting because there's a reasonable reason to believe that. If not, then what's the drag on? There's no actual way to get it back. So
there's 50 nations right now supporting Ukraine, to include the United States, the only superpower on the planet. The idea that Ukraine couldn't achieve the pre-February 2020 borders is also not rational.
Right.
The people who argue against it go, look at the size of the Russian military. Like, again, it isn't a numbers game. It's a will game.
Yeah.
If Putin believes he can win, and he's going to keep, and if he believes he can win and get, certain things out of it, of course he'll keep saying, even though it's destroying his economy, which is what people are arguing against, and the economics and all of this part of it, it's so complex. But the simple rationale of like, well, if you just stop, give him what he wants, all the killing stops. That's not reality.
I hear that. Okay, this is actually, I'm happy I'm hearing this from you because I was like on the fence about this, so this is something I want to give like more just thought, just spell, in my brain. I always was like at this point a little bit like, I just felt, I don't know what, again, probably media, I wasn't sure, but I wasn't sure what to listen to because I don't know a lot about the Russia-Ukraine situation, but you just have your instinct and your gut. So it was leaning me towards like, yeah, okay, I don't think Putin's innocent by any means, but also, okay, maybe we also, like, we're maybe not innocent either in this entire situation. Perhaps it seems like maybe we could have been better. And then, like, my perspective was, all right, Ukraine's still here. Great. That's awesome. And doesn't seem to, like, everyone I'm hearing, I'm listening to, they're going to be able to get more territory. So take a deal. But I hear what you're saying, for sure. I hear you.
It's almost
I'm just curious to see what will happen with Trump. That part's going to be very interesting. Trump is going to push, by the way, Trump is pushing for a deal.
And the Trump effect, again, this is the biggest fact of the reality that war isn't just about the numbers, is that the Trump effect of if people, it's already changing things in all these theaters, just the ideal that the will of all the actors will change.
Yeah.
So when, like Hamas saying, I'm ready to negotiate, like,
yeah.
Or Putin saying, I'm willing to have a conversation.
Yeah, it's fast. That part is fast.
This is the greatest indicator that in war, it is a contest of will. It isn't a numbers game.
I'm with you. Okay, that part I am keeping in my mind because when I become a general, that's the idea. No, 2 more questions, which are really, really important, actually. They're going to kill me because I'm going over time. Again, so much about perception and history and studying history, which you have done a lot of, clearly, is about identifying accurate facts versus revisionist history.
Yep.
The world loves revisionist history right now. I mean, we are seeing it on full display. How do you, when studying history, come out with what you believe the accurate facts are?
That's a great question. Actually,
I saved it for the second to last, almost the last. My next one is even better, by the way. So.
Within my world, again, I learn every day. That's a part of the process. And I have a unique way for war, learning in wars, I have to go to that location. So even if it's an ancient war, I want to go and walk the ground because in war, the people are a big factor and who are the leaders making the decisions. So like there's a process. So like you said, like if you understand the firebomb of Tokyo or the dropping of nuclear weapons, you can't just run the numbers and put the rationale. You have to go back and put yourselves in the seats of those leaders, all of the context from the societal, the news, everything. So there's a process for studying history that I use. One of mine that's unique, and again, why I had to go into Gaza. Like I'm not listening what the IDF say solely, although I trust Israel and the IDF personally more than I do a terrorist organization who say they want to kill everybody on the other side just for living. That's kind of, but I also am trying to be as objective as possible. In my world, we used to say that the victor writes the history. And I'm sure like the comics Dave Smiths would say, like, I have a different history. I say the writers write the history. So that's kind of like, like the Peloponnesian Wars, like what we know about ancient wars, like, well, who wrote it? Or like even the religious texts, like, well, it's important to know who wrote it.
Yeah.
And when it was written. So for me, in order to go back, and I do a lot of case studies, so I try to go back and then analyze everything that is known. And for historians, there's a process for that. First person, like, again, being able to interview the prime minister of Israel in war, yeah. I can now say definitively, this is what he
told me.
Yeah.
There's no hearsay.
That's right. And these are the decisions that he made. And these were the numbers that were known. This is what I saw the IDF doing.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's first person, if it's an active war, or you go back and try to find first person, and you don't read what was written. You go to all the source documents and try to analyze it. That's how I do it. But there is a process, if it's about war, that I use. And that's why writing these case studies, why I can argue, and I feel confident arguing anybody about urban warfare, because I've gone through that process of not only reading what was written, but going back to the events and analyzing them through a first person.
You've walked the grounds.
Walked the ground, even in, like I did Kyiv. Like, why did Russia, the second most powerful military at the time, fail to take this little military's ground away from them? Well, terrain played an effect. People played an effect. Your weakness played an effect. There's a process, but who wrote the history is really important.
Very interesting. Last question. Perhaps the one that I saved this for last. John, why? Why do you put yourself out there in this degree? You're taking a lot more criticism than you are getting tons of praise. Why are you putting yourself out there for the Jewish people at the end of the day?
I've gotten this before, and it's almost like it's hard to answer because it's like you took me all the way back to the beginning of I joined the military. I had some values of hard work and all that. The military teaches you about service, duty, honor, country, truth, not truth, good. I've seen evil. I've looked evil in the face.
Yeah.
And what I saw on October 7th was the worst evil I've ever seen in my lifetime. Watching their videos, not what they said, what they did. And watching the October 7th video, what thousands of them did. Not one individual with evil intentions. There's a lot of reasons, mainly because I believe that the truth still matters. Now, we have a lot of people, to include on social media, with truth in their name, who aren't about truths. They're about, clicks and conspiracy theories and all this stuff. I believe that the truth still matters, but in this case, in Israel, is that the lies started from day one, from what actually happened on October 7th. And I don't want my children being raised in a world where the truth isn't what matters or what good is. Even from what the IDF do, when you go visit people that are doing everything physically possible to protect the enemy's civilians, but the world thinks that they're genocidal maniacs that are shooting children in the head, that really concerns me for my children.
It irks you.
Yeah, it irks me. It really, and it motivates me to try to pick apart. I have the knowledge, with knowledge, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. I had all this knowledge that some people might have said was useless knowledge. And all of a sudden I'm the guy in the room going, what'd you just say?
Yeah.
You just said that they bombed
this is actually my domain.
Yeah.
I will tell you actually, misreporter or whatever.
Right. From literally the New York Times printing lies, or this person, people not understanding, did you notice what he just said at that one little turn of it?
Yeah.
He just made you believe something that's not true because he turned it. Look at the number of civilians dead. And they don't even know they're doing it. So there's so many compelling reasons why I've stood up for the truth And people say, well, you stood up for the Jews. Like, no, I stood up for the truth, and shame on everybody who didn't. Because I know a lot of people in the military world who know for a fact that what Israel has done is above and beyond any legal requirement, above and is very moral, ethical, and they're not being vocal even though they have positions of power. Some are, like we have the Fettermans and like these in the world.
Yeah, what about who's Nick? How do I pronounce his last name?
Fuentes?
No, not Fuentes. No, Fuentes. I think his name is. He's a former Green Beret. Freitas. What's his name? How do you pronounce it?
I don't know how you pronounce his name, but I've seen his.
No, I've seen him recently going. He's been making a breakthrough lately. That was fascinating.
That's great. But
yeah, I was just listening to stuff similar.
I don't know if you can. So I know some people want one simple answer, like, with great power becomes great responsibility. I have all this knowledge, and the military, the U.S. military invested in me, and I gained this knowledge. But what do I fight people on? Like I fight, like now I have to fight CNN. I have to fight. I mean, New York Times has took 7 months after Bibi mentioned my name in Congress. The New York Times put a team for 7 months to interview anybody I have ever served with.
It's unbelievable.
Saying, okay, like, is he not an expert? Is he being paid
to pick you apart?
Yeah, and
that's the goal of it.
That's the goal. That's frustrating, but
it becomes personal at that point. That's for sure. Also, I mean, I know you're not but that's just like.
So there's lots of reasons.
It's not. Yeah, no, I actually love that because this is not it's not even about a Jewish thing. It's about the truth, and that is. It's. I mean, it sounds like that's the highest. That's the most noble thing, honestly, any human could go after just in general. Is the actual truth. So that's incredible. Okay, we're a solid, I think, hour over our timeline here. But by the way, I just want to be totally honest. I could sit here and talk to you for another 3 hours. Like, I'm not kidding. And there's a ton of questions I had. No, that I had written down. First I have to make a flight. I'm going back in
I didn't know
3 hours.
Wow.
No, I don't have to make a flight this. Like I could still get away with another hour. In regards to my flight, I cannot get away with another hour in regards to anyone else in the room. There's a bunch of other stuff. I wanted to ask you on I had questions on what the role is at being chair at West Point for the Modern War Institute, whatever, a whole bunch of things. But we'll save that for round 2.
Sure.
Because otherwise we're gonna go another 3 hours.
This is why I did 8 hours with Jocko.
Yeah, I saw that. That was like 3.5, and then another 3.
It was an 8-hour conversation because. Like, if you really dig into these, there's so many variations.
There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, to unpack.
It's a lot. John, first of all, I want to say thank you so much. I am so honored,
Thank you.
to be sitting here with you. I'm really lucky, and one of the great things about this podcast experiment, if you will, and journey is that I get to sit with incredible people, and I really feel that way right now. I'm very, very honored to be here. On behalf of, first of all, everyone who's watching, the entire Jewish people, and I mean this, and I know that every single person would want me to say this, I want to say thank you for all you've done on our behalf, speaking the truth to power, despite all the criticism and everything that's come your way because of it. We're honestly internally indebted. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate that.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. We will be back next week with another awesome episode, God willing. John is amazing. Again, thank you. Peace and love, everyone. Like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed this. Jam the like button. Thank you. Peace.